So when I was doing the permitting process here, so let's say on Wednesday I'd go meet the city and we'd determine we need X, Y, and Z, and they'd say, okay, well, give us a day or two and we'll get back to you. Well, they get back to me at 9 o'clock Pacific time, which is 11 o'clock Dallas time, and
PM?
say, yeah,
Oh,
AM, and
oh,
they'd
AM.
say,
Okay.
hey, we want to have a meeting later today at 4 p.m.
No, you're
Pacific time.
kidding.
So, I'd gather everything and I'd run to the airport and buy a ticket. And I can't even begin to tell you how much those tickets were. I mean, it was phenomenal.
What I wanted to talk about today, Bruce, I'm going to spring this one on you because I've been going to this planning commission meetings and I've been going to the city council meetings. And, I work a lot with the restaurants and trying to figure out who's coming in and who's leaving and what they're doing as they're coming in and how long it's going to be before they're ready. And all of this takes a lot of calls to the city to figure out where the progress is on these particular concepts, moving into town. Like, for instance, we have the old Wild Taco location, which was right by your building at 222 Ocean.
Right.
It sits on the corner. That's been taken over by Board and Brew, and that's owned by a guy out of San Clemente. So he has a San Clemente place, and now he's going to do a Board and Brew there, which is actually perfect, sandwich shop. So he's gone through his little process, and he's working right along. And then we have another entity that moved into the Red Dragon called Q Terrace, and that's a little bit more difficult to get information on. They haven't really started a permitting process, not very easy to track them down. So I thought, so many people who are residents look at this and think, it takes so long for Laguna Beach to get a restaurant in place. Why does it take so long? And sometimes they're really not looking at the typical processes that are in place in these cities from beginning to end. And I know, you've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of these processes.
Yes.
And you have said that even though most processes are typical, everybody has their own little angles and their own little, weirdnesses in their cities. But you have also said that Laguna Beach tended to be a little bit more on the difficult side, as I recall.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So,
and I'm not sure you would call it difficulty. I think it's just their process. And if I had to stand back and just sum it up in one phrase, instead of having one meeting with 10 items on the agenda, it seems that they have 10 meetings with hardly anything on the agenda. Or one item. Or one item. And, the last project I did there, I was commuting back and forth. So we'd have a meeting and I would.
Now, you're saying you were commuting back and forth from Dallas. Even though you had a home here, you were at the time spending more time in Dallas.
But I had the project agenda I had going at the time was very heavy in Dallas. So when I was doing the permitting process here, so let's say on Wednesday I'd go meet the city and we'd determine we need X, Y, and Z, and they'd say, okay, well, give us a day or two and we'll get back to you. Well, they get back to me at 9 o'clock Pacific time, which is 11 o'clock Dallas time.
PM?
And say, yeah,
okay.
AM. And they'd say,
okay.
Hey, we want to have a meeting later today at 4 p.m.
No,
Pacific
you're kidding.
time. So, I'd gather everything and I'd run to the airport and buy a ticket. and I can't even begin to tell you how much those tickets were. I mean, it was phenomenal. And a power of attorney letter from the owner, and that's how I got it done.
Well, the owner certainly didn't want to fly to Laguna all those times.
Oh, no. But it was broken up in all these little segments when it really could have been, give me the entire agenda. I'll bring every document that you need to answer any questions. And so, and being that they were segmented in little smaller meetings, that process took a lot longer than it should have, in my opinion.
Now, in most of the cities that you've worked in, does it tend to be bring it all together in a meeting, or does it tend to be little processes, little meetings?
They would prefer to bring it all together and have one meeting.
Okay. So Laguna may be working out of an older model, maybe.
Well, it could be an older model, but it's based on the staff that they have there, and I'm sure there's employees at the city that because it's a small city, wear different hats for many. They have more than one job function.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there can be conflict that goes on there. We don't know, but to get a building permit for a project is a process.
Okay. So
And
let's start before you even get to the building permit process.
okay,
Okay. So let's say, your family, the Lombardis, or not your family, but your owner
yeah,
found this property, decided they were
yes,
going to make a restaurant out of it.
correct,
It was a retail space.
correct.
Right. Okay. So what was the first thing that you had to do before you even approached the city?
I flew out there and did a site review.
Okay. And then after you did the site review, talked it over with the owners, and you said, okay, we're going to go for this.
Correct.
We're going to purchase the property.
And I want to say there was a base plan. Somebody created a base plan, and I don't know if it was the owner that was selling the building, but we did have a base plan. And when I say base plan, there was a drawing of the existing building.
The retail.
Yeah, of the
Yeah.
retail building.
So at least you had a drawing. You didn't have to go find it.
Correct. So that saved us doing as-built drawings. The as-built drawings are already done.
Okay, that's good. So you have the as-built drawings.
Correct.
And then what do you do from there?
Okay, we take the as-built drawings, and then from there, I design the concept.
Okay.
From a function standpoint of view, where's the kitchen? Where's the kitchen going to be located in relationship to the exit doors? And being that this was an existing building and it was under a historical hold, we didn't have the opportunity to move doors, exit doors, or windows or anything. However, that building was built at the time it was bought, that's exactly how it was going to stay.
Now, in most cases, you don't have to deal with historical buildings.
Correct.
This was a rare case.
Correct.
And a complicated case.
Correct. Very.
And the city wanted to keep it a historical building. And was that supposed to be something of a trade for the parking, as I recall?
Yes. If I recall, I think that's how it was worked out.
Yeah. Okay. So at what point do you contact the city and say, okay, we own this now. We have a functional plan. We need to get a business license.
We don't ask for a business license just yet. What I typically do is get a schematic design done.
Okay.
To kind of get the idea of what we're doing there. Mm-hmm. And then I request a meeting with the plan reviewer.
Okay.
Or zoning or whoever would be in charge of that category.
Okay.
And I have a courtesy meeting with them to show them what our intent is, what the design intent for the space, and how the concept is going to function in the existing space.
Okay. And then who has to approve that before you say?
Well, it's not necessarily an approval process. It's making the city building department aware of what we're doing.
Okay.
And from the outside looking in, it's a very respectful thing to do with the building department because they're part of this process. Mm-hmm. They're part of it. Whether you like it or not, they're partners in the deal too.
Big part of the process.
Big part, yes. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where it starts with us. And then if there's no major red flags, then we proceed from schematic design to construction documents.
Okay.
And then in that process is all the architectural, all the structural, and all of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering is done then.
Okay.
In that particular case, we had to put the grease trap in because it was never a restaurant. So originally they wanted to put it in between the two buildings, and I wouldn't agree to that.
The city suggested that.
Yeah. And I ended up finding a hybrid grease trap that had the same gallon flow as a big concrete grease trap, but basically fit in the back of a pickup truck. It fit behind the building.
As compared to how large is a grease trap usually? Most people don't know.
Well, it depends on gallons, but typically on a restaurant that size would be 2,000 gallon grease trap. That would probably be 6 foot tall, 6 foot wide, and 8 foot long.
That's big. That's big.
Concrete.
Yeah. Okay.
The grease trap that I put in was probably 3 foot by 5 foot by 3 foot tall.
Okay. Well, when I was talking with the city the other day, and we may be jumping ahead, they said, well, once they apply for the business license, then we send somebody down from the water department to check out the status of the grease trap.
Yes. If there's a grease trap there, they would do that.
Right. So they have to go through a few hoops of fire themselves before they even grant the business license.
Correct. And not every city does it this way.
Right.
Not every city, when you get your certificate of occupancy, when the project's done, is when that's typically you're awarded your business license.
Oh, I
In
see.
Laguna, a business license is something on top of your certificate of occupancy.
Okay. Because as I understand, now I may be wrong, the city of Laguna Beach can correct me, but the business license is really the first application that then allows them to say, okay, now we need to go to planning, we need to get permits for this, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Yeah. So once you draw up the plans, then at what point do you end up in front of the building or the planning?
Okay, so once all the plans are done and all the disciplines have done, structural, mechanical, plumbing, architectural, everything is done. The plans are sealed and the package is created.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say the plans are sealed, what does that mean to the average?
Sealed it's a professional seal that it'd be the architectural seal that seals the drawings that basically said these plans are drawn to code and the building is buildable.
We're
Same
not going
thing
to keep
with
fiddling with them.
What's that?
We're not going to keep fiddling.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's it. When
Okay,
the
so
drawings are sealed, they're done.
okay, so let me ask you this: you had mentioned a client who will remain not anonymous that you've been working with, who decided to stay with the old equipment in the kitchen, and the plans that you had drawn up required new equipment in
Correct.
the kitchen. And so at that point, the client has altered the plan.
We haven't altered the plan yet.
Okay.
The client's desire is to reuse existing exhaust hoods and reuse existing HVAC equipment.
Mm-hmm.
They're both very outdated. And I mean, like outdated more than 20 years old.
Okay, that's pretty outdated.
Yeah. And it doesn't make sense if you're putting capital into building a restaurant. I mean, two of the most important components of the whole operation. Why would you sign a 10-year lease and use 20-year-old equipment? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and the bottom line is, I would think that when they get all the way through the process and the inspectors start coming out, the inspectors aren't going to pass the equipment.
No.
And then what do you do?
Because here's the big problem with this particular client doesn't understand is the drawings were drawn and sealed with all new equipment.
Correct.
Just because he's the tenant, he doesn't have the ability to go back and say and tell the city, no, we're not doing what's drawn and sealed.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do this instead.
Right. So when you
work that way.
seal plans, that means we're done fiddling with it. This is
Correct.
the way it's going to be designed and structured.
And then the building inspectors inspect. When they inspect, their inspection assures that the work was done per that plan.
Okay, exactly.
So see that the building inspectors are our partners too. They're a partner in the whole process.
Okay, so let's go back to you sealing the plans. Now, Who do you get in front of?
Okay, now we create a package that we submit to the city with a building permit application. Mm-hmm. And the building permit application explains what the project is, what the address is. It explains the legal description. Anything about that piece of property, whether it's a lease space, if it's a lease space, or if it's a building that you're renovating, that's in your building permit.
Mm-hmm.
And you submit that to the building department of whatever city it is. And then it goes to intake, which is a quick review to make sure everything that they expect in a package is in the package. Mm-hmm. Once you pass intake, then it goes to the process of plan review.
Okay. I'm just picturing this huge assembly line. We're way at the beginning of the assembly line.
It should. I mean, I've consulted with cities and created that line. Mm-hmm. And trust me, the line works beautifully.
Yeah.
So, it depends on what department and how it's staffed. And, the bigger the city, the bigger the building department, the more people work there, and the quicker things seem to get done. Supposedly they get done.
Right. Quicker. Okay. So to go back to the Laguna Beach example, you submit and they go through the intake process. Then where does it go from there?
Then we wait for their first round of comments. So all those sheets that we dropped out, well, we don't do sheets anymore. It's pretty much all electronic.
Right.
So they review the plan electronically, and whatever specific discipline is reviewing, if they see something, they create a comment, and then we get a turnaround and we get a list of comments that we need to address that is on the list of comments.
Now, does this happen before you end up in front of the planning commission?
No, no, no. This typically it goes building first.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Building, and then it goes to zoning.
Okay. Okay.
Sometimes it goes concurrently.
Okay.
And majority of the time we wish it would go concurrently.
So give me an example, if you can remember, how long you waited to get through building, initial comments, and zoning.
In Laguna, it was roughly 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
Well, that surprises me.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was staying on top of it because it was retail and it had to be rezoned as
Right.
restaurant.
That's different.
Okay. And then it had to go the extra phase for the historical review.
Mm.
So that took some time. And then, it took time to get the liquor license and it took time to get the business license. So all in all, we were ready to start construction, and we started construction the day after we got a permit.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you about the liquor license because, as a newbie coming in, I mean, it's pretty difficult to get a liquor license. How did you manage to get one even in 6 months?
And on that particular project, I don't know why, but we weren't involved in the liquor process, liquor license process. I don't know how it got done, but I couldn't tell you how it got done.
Right. Because I look at some of these situations where, they're held up for a year, 2 years waiting for the liquor license. And then they enter a lottery and they may be lucky to get chosen in the lottery.
Yeah.
And then even when the liquor license comes back to them, many restaurant operators are surprised that it still has to go through the city for approval for the full liquor usage.
Yeah.
And in cases, the city may decide you can't have your liquor license in play, or they may decide you can have wine and beer only.
Yeah.
And you've just spent $200,000 on a liquor license.
I don't know. I wasn't involved in that portion of the project. Everything else, I had to do everything else. I didn't. That was more owner. I think that was more owner attorney related.
Okay.
So I wasn't involved in.
Okay. So then in the 6 month time frame, how many meetings did you have to have with the city? How many turnarounds had to happen before you were allowed? Like the next day you got everything. The next day you started working. But in the 6 months, did you have to do a lot of back and forth?
We probably had it in excess of 20 meetings.
20 meetings. Okay. And were these meetings that they'd be like, hey, be here this afternoon?
A few of them were.
So now when did you get in front of the planning commission? When did you have to sit in front of the planning commission?
Planning commission was probably 2.5 months in.
Okay.
The process.
Okay. And so when you actually sat in front of them with them going through all of the stuff and they had their own questions, these are different questions than what building had.
Oh, yeah.
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 And did you have to make a lot of changes then?
No, we didn't. We didn't have to make a lot of changes to the exterior.
Okay, that's good. So then after you make the changes, then you have to go back in front of planning, correct? Or do you just submit it and get it approved?
Well, if there was comment, I don't recall having any zoning comments.
Okay.
So I think we were asked the questions were cleared, and then I think it passed zoning and then
Stamp of approval
process to where we continue with the building process.
Right. Now, did the city council get involved in having to approve the process as well?
I did go to 2 or 3 council meetings.
Uh-huh.
And I think I went to 2 or 3 zoning meetings.
Okay. So the planning commission handles the zoning?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just making it clear for everybody so that they understand. Yeah. So it's building, and then it's planning / zoning, and then it's city council.
Correct.
And you've got to get through those questions and answers.
Correct.
And then you finally get what approved? The permit, the building permit.
Building permit process.
And then the next day.
If I recall, a couple of the council meetings planning zoning meetings were in reference to a variance because you were able to see the top of one of the exhaust fans on the roof from the sidewalk,
Oh, from across the
from
street
across the street.
sidewalk.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me about that.
Yeah, like if you go down to the corner by Main Beach,
And look back at the
look up,
roof.
look back at the roof over the theater, you could see one of the exhaust fans.
Okay. So you had to change that.
No, we had to get a variance for it.
Okay, gotcha. And how long does it usually take to get a variance?
I think that was probably 90 days of the process.
Okay. And then the building permit started with a demolition, right?
Correct.
So you had to get the demolition permit
That came with the building
with the
permit.
building permit.
Yes.
And so once you get through the demolition, how much is going on with building inspectors at this time? Or are you getting through the demolition and then you begin to build and that's when the inspectors start showing up?
We go through the demolition,
Mm-hmm.
and then the first thing to go in is the underground plumbing
Mm-hmm.
and any underground electrical. And before that can be covered up, it has to be inspected. And that's when the inspection process starts.
Okay.
So the inspectors inspect the underground. Once it's passed, then the backfill comes in. The backfill comes in, and the rebar for the structural steel is set for the concrete, and then the concrete floor is poured back.
And do they have to check the rebar and the flooring?
Yes, there is inspection prior to pouring concrete, which is the rebar and the chairs of the rebar and how it's supported off the fill.
So you pour the concrete. Now, see, this is all, I mean, this isn't city intensive. This is code that has to do with national code, state code,
Every
local
project.
code, every code in the world. I mean, this is why when we have earthquakes, hopefully we don't have things happen like what just happened in, across the world where all the buildings toppled and collapsed.
So framing, yeah, we did framing, and then there was
an inspection.
There was some seismic things that we had to do for the engineer and for the building, and that was all put in, and it was inspected before. Everything has to be inspected before it gets covered up.
Right. So how many inspections typically have to take place before you can put the sheetrock up?
Correct.
How many, you think?
Well, it depends on the project, typically 6.
And then how long are you waiting for building inspectors on the average?
Typically.
So you went through 6 building inspections and then started the sheetrock.
Correct.
And then what goes after the sheetrock?
Then your finishes come in, plastering and finishing, and all your ductwork is in, all your mechanical is in. In the back of the house, in the kitchen, all of the equipment connections are put in, the gas lines are run. Any ductwork for exhaust is put in. Any ductwork for makeup air is put in. Those units are typically set on the roof if they're a rooftop, or if they're, in that particular case, I had to squeeze all the mechanical in an attic space that we created on the second floor.
No kidding. Okay. And so by time you get all of that hooked up, how many more inspections do you have to go through in that process?
Well, you got mechanical rough, you got plumbing rough, you got electrical rough. Mm-hmm. You have to have those before, and you got framing. Typically, you have to have mechanical, electrical, and plumbing inspection done prior to any framing, because at times those trades can either drilling holes or cutting for ductwork. Sometimes they can cut framing members that are structural that you don't get a framing inspection until those trades have been inspected. The inspector, that's his last look to make sure the integrity of the structural has to be how it is.
All right. So then you've got your finishers coming in, and in the kitchen, you're starting to put equipment into place.
Well, you're starting to put finishes on the wall,
mm-hmm.
and you're starting to put flooring down.
Mm.
And then that's when you're creating basically a sealed space from rodents and
very good point.
Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that is all said and done, then the equipment starts. And typically the equipment it's probably I like to get the back of the house done prior to the front of the house being done, because it's been my experience over the years that if there's anything in the kitchen package that is wrong, it's typically a 6 to 8 week time frame to get it corrected.
So when you're talking about something being wrong, is it something that is done that you say this isn't right, or that the city comes out and says
Well,
this isn't right?
typically it's fabrication.
Okay.
If there was a mistake in the shop drawing and the piece that was fabricated wrong,
Hmm.
which is keeping whatever equipment to connect to it to complete the kitchen, you have to start over and you got to get in production line somewhere. And it's, I mean, sometimes it's 4 weeks, sometimes it's 6 weeks. So, you know, when all those mistakes are found early, it keeps the schedule
Right.
status quo because as the front of the house is getting completed, the back of the house is 85% completed and you're only waiting on 2 items.
Okay. Got it. So in
So,
this process, when you're doing the finish in the front and you've got the kitchen at 85% ish,
yes,
are you having any meetings with the city at this point, or is it just building
no,
inspectors?
just building inspectors.
Okay. So you don't really have anything to do with the city until it's time for final inspections?
Final inspections and
Right.
certificate of occupancy
Okay.
and
So
ADA.
so continue with this. I mean, for me, this is fascinating. I don't know if it's fascinating to anybody else, but I mean, like you said before, this is a manufacturing plant. This is like the
Correct.
closest thing to a hospital
Correct.
ever.
Correct.
And so there's a lot that goes into this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So once you start getting the kitchen all put together and you're starting to get everything worked out in the front of house, then what comes next? Just finish?
Yeah, it just finishes, but let's back up because it's the engineering that's key.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazed at the common and it's the common public person doesn't know because they don't know. They know what they know. Anything that you touch is engineered in some form, some way or some form. That's how things work.
Mm-hmm.
Every piece of your automobile is engineered.
Mm-hmm.
Every piece of the restaurant is engineered.
Yeah.
And all the connections that connect that equipment that was delivered there is engineered. So when you turn the switch on, everything works
Right.
and it works properly. So the exhaust on the hood has been engineered to where it doesn't suck your hat off in the dining room because there's another piece of equipment that supplies makeup air for that hood. So it doesn't suck the hood out of the room.
Right.
It's engineered to suck 20% of the air out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how specific it gets.
Right.
We're going to fill the hood with air for makeup air, but we still want 20% of the restaurant air to go
Mm-hmm.
up the hood.
Mm-hmm.
And that keeps the space balanced.
Right. Exactly. And we've had that engineering lesson
Yes.
in a previous. So, okay. So let me ask you too, when you design the front of house, you're getting chairs, you're getting tables, you're getting
Right.
banquettes. How much of this is ready-made percentage wise average? And how much of this is stuff that you custom?
Chairs you can pretty much buy.
Mm.
Let's back up. When we know what the finishes are when the plans go to the building permit.
Right. So you can start on that.
So typically for us to have, it's typical to have 60 to 70% of the project bought out before we even get a building permit. So we know when the chairs are coming. We've already selected the fabric. We know the tile's been ordered. The finishes have been ordered. We know what's going on the floor. We know what's going on the walls. We know what the millwork's going to look like. We've already selected the slabs of marble for countertops. We've already selected all of the restroom tile. We've already selected the fixtures. Everything is on the finish schedule.
Right. Exactly.
And when it's in permit process, the city too knows what the finish schedule is. So typically we wait for our first round of comments
Mm-hmm.
before we start buying out. Because
Mm-hmm.
typically, if there's a comment in the buyout, we'd get it in the first round.
Okay.
So if there's no comments in the finishes, then we go ahead and start over.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, in your situation, you were dealing with a historical factor.
Correct.
And they wanted you to take the building back to, was it 97% of its original
Yes.
historic
That was the goal.
look?
Yes.
And how much time do you think that added to your schedule?
Easily 90 days.
Okay. Because it consisted of another set of inspections, right?
Correct. But
Yeah.
the inspections were, let me give you an example. Okay, the patio wall fire code says we need to have 3 sprinkler heads. and we have to drill through the existing stucco.
Not a good thing to do for historical, I'm guessing.
Okay, so before you drill through the stucco, we had to go up the street and make an appointment for the gal that was running the historical district to come by and do a site visit and explain to her what we had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then she would go back and do whatever she did. And 2 or 3 days later, we would either get an approval or decline. And if it was a decline, then we had to back up and figure out another way.
Right. Okay. And how many times were you declined versus approved?
Well, I think there was probably 4 or 5 declines. But the declines were more on the architectural elements.
Mm-hmm.
Like we couldn't replace the windows.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't change the door.
Couldn't change the door. The door was bad, and she declined it first, but I did get the exact replica made of the door out of the same material.
Of the same material?
Yeah.
What was the material?
It was it was redwood.
Oh, wow.
Redwood,
okay.
if I recall.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. And didn't you say when you had to drill the stucco for the fire sprinklers, she came down and said no, and the fire chief and so then you had to go get the fire chief and bring him over?
Correct.
And he said, I supersede this.
Fire safety supersedes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So how many times was the fire chief involved in this process? Because typically, aren't they just at the very end when they sign off?
Yeah, he was. I think it was like 2 incidents that we had to get approval on. And then it was the fire riser was a big issue on where that was located.
What's the fire riser?
It's where the water line comes out of the street.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes into a mechanical system, the automatic mechanical system that works the fire sprinkler.
Oh, okay, got it.
And that's kind of right on the corner. It's right on the corner of the building, but there was no other way to do it than the way we did it. And we had 3 or 4 site meetings about that.
Huh. Okay. So one of the other restaurants in town that was building out, I'm not going to name who it was, they had to actually move the fire hydrant on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant.
Had to move it off the sidewalk?
They had to move it like 4 feet in a different direction. And they had to do it. The city told them it was their responsibility. And I've never quite understood that piece. Yeah. But at any rate, back to your building.
Fire hydrant.
Back to your building. Okay. And then the fire panel, the panel that you actually put in place, that also has to be inspected. And I've actually heard of times when the fire panel is in place, which is the panel where they go and they can shut everything off.
Correct.
If there's a fire, the fire station knows where it is. They can go and they shut everything off. All the power.
That's the main electrical panel. Yeah.
The main electrical panel.
Main disconnect.
Yeah. So I've heard of situations, in fact, in one of the restaurants on Forest Avenue who had everything in place, had it inspected for that. And then the last inspector came in and said, you need to move this 3 feet.
Move what?
The electrical panel.
Electrical panel?
Yeah. And he was like, what? And that was a big process.
Oh, yeah.
It was a really big process.
Yeah, because you got all the circuits that have been run to it, plus the power from outside that has been run to it. So, I mean, to move an electrical panel box, everything's basically scrap.
Yeah. How is it that something like that would get away from the
I have no idea.
Inspection process?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if it passed electrical inspection, I don't understand why it didn't pass fire.
Yeah. And the electrical inspection and the fire inspection is at the end, right?
Yes. Well, there's inspection, because there's electrical and fire inspections ongoing throughout the project.
Okay. So all told, in the project, from beginning to end, when you start with inspectors and you end with your final inspector, which is typically the fire chief giving you the occupancy.
Correct.
How many inspections do you think there were, including historical?
15. There's typically 15 to 25.
15 to 25.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how long did it take you from once you had the building permit to begin the demolition? How long did it take you to finish that restaurant?
9 months.
And then what is your typical average once you get a building permit?
Less than 6.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So then you got through the whole process, and who's the final that has to sign everything off? I mean, I just talked about the fire chief, but who are all the final inspectors?
Head building inspector. Yeah.
Head honcho. And what do they do?
Well, they're going to oversee all the inspections prior.
Okay.
So when the head building inspector does his final inspection and issues a certificate of occupancy, all the fire safety is done,
Hmm.
all the electrical done, mechanical, plumbing, HVAC, framing, all those structural, all those inspections are done.
Okay.
He's there as the very last set of eyes.
Now, is it the very last set of eyes after the city or county health inspector?
Yes.
Okay. So when does the city or county, depending on who you're working with, like
That
in Laguna Beach, we
no,
rely on the Orange County health inspectors to
no,
come
correct, because
around.
the city doesn't have their own.
Right.
Correct. Okay, so typically that's in the process of the last batch of inspections. It would be final electrical, final plumbing, final mechanical, health inspection, um, prior to fire safety, prior to your final.
Okay. So this is something that's becoming an issue with several restaurants that I've talked to in Laguna Beach, and I've mentioned it to you too, where they're held up by the OC health inspector months
Because of staff.
because of staffing. I mean, Orange County is a huge area,
Yeah.
and they don't have enough staff. And there have
They've
been
got a lot of
people who've
restaurants
waited
too.
4 months, 7 months for a
Yeah.
health inspector.
That's that's a little ridiculous.
And if you don't get your health inspection, oh, then where do you go?
Well, typically vendors won't supply you without a health inspection.
Right, exactly. So you've got to correct whatever's wrong, and then you have to wait for them to come back out again.
I've done many restaurants that the owner thought he was really going to gain something by having food delivered
Right.
to a facility without a health inspection. I mean, I've seen entire walk-in coolers full of food,
Hmm.
and the health inspector stand there and order the staff to put it all in the trash.
Yes, I've heard those
Cut every
stories.
bag open and put it in the trash
Yeah.
and put ammonia water on it.
No kidding.
Yes.
I haven't heard that.
You're not going back in the trash can and pull the food out of that, washing it off.
That's incredible. And you know what it really is just impatience of the
Yes.
owner to get up and operating. But
Yes.
you're talking anywhere from on the average, you're talking 30 days delay on the average. I mean, most people aren't having to deal with these excessively long health
Well, let
inspections.
me just tell you this. If a health inspection is 6 months out,
Hmm.
I don't think you wait till your restaurant's done to schedule it.
No, if you know that that's what the tail is around town, you schedule them.
I mean, you would schedule them when you're just starting finishes.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
And then you just make sure that you're in play. Because if the
And
health
if
inspector
you're,
shows up and you're not ready,
well, I mean, if you got a 6 month lead time, it's kind of hard to miss that cue, don't you think?
well, so when you call into the health inspectors, do they say this is when we're coming?
I don't ever recall waiting 7 months for a health inspection.
Right.
Typically, it's whether it's county or city or, I mean, well, I take that back. I have the last county one. It took 3 days, but
3 days.
3 days, but, and it was local here in Texas. It was county. And it was a small city like Laguna, and they had county.
Uh-huh.
But when I called the inspection, he said, well, I'll be on that side of the town on Thursday, and I can see you Thursday afternoon. And it was like Monday when I was calling it in.
Okay, so if you knew that health inspection was going to be 4 months or 5 months or 6 months, what would you, Bruce, do? I mean, can't you go to the health inspector?
I would schedule the inspection. I would schedule the inspection probably right when I started putting finishes in the kitchen.
Right.
If I knew that they were 6 months out,
But you can't go and talk to them?
I'm just going to tell you, when you get into this part of the business,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a conversation can be annoying to that particular person
Yes.
because everybody just wants to complain to them.
Yeah.
So it's been my experience, the less conversation, the better.
The quieter you are,
Yes.
the happier they are with you.
Just only ask for what you need. And I just need a health inspection.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. All right. So I hope that this gave people an idea of the process because it's a process.
It is.
Did we forget anything in there? Well, one of the things that I want to be okay, before I move on to that. Did we forget anything in there?
I don't think so. I think we covered quite a bit.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a few things we forgot, but
Now, one of the interesting stories you told me, and I have heard of other people doing this, is if they have a space, a warehouse space, any kind of thing like that, they will build out all of the banquettes, everything that they have to do so that everything is ready to just move into the space.
correct.
Right. And so I would love to have you tell your nightclub story when you were supposed to change out a nightclub in a week.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it was part of downtown Dallas called Dallas Alley.
Uh-huh.
And actually, I'm still very good friends of the president that used to run that. This it was in the late '80s, and there was 7 nightclubs on one address, and you paid one cover.
Oh.
And some had live entertainment, some had DJs, but it was quite the concept. I mean, they in 1988 their liquor sales per month was $1.2 million.
Just the liquor sales.
Liquor sales per month,
So it was almost like a theme park of nightclubs.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Great security, great part of town, very safe. Females loved it because it was safe and it was comfortable and they had a lot of fun. Well, from time to time, attendance would start to lag in a club, and when that started to happen, they'd call me to
Mm-hmm.
design a new club.
Mm-hmm.
Once we got it designed, then we'd start talking about schedule. And part of the building that I was in was there was an empty warehouse next door. So we'd actually build the nightclub in that empty warehouse next door, like a movie set. And then they would close the concept on Sunday at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have to have the concept back operational by 4 o'clock on that following Friday. And the contract penalty was whatever their sales was. And that,
Like, so for instance, if you weren't open Friday night, they would look at their typical average sales on a Friday night and say, this is your penalty.
yeah. So if they sold $12,000 in liquor,
Mm-hmm.
my contract penalty was $12,000 per day.
Okay. And you never had that happen.
We never paid a late fee.
Never paid a late fee. Okay.
We were
And
always done. We were always completed the day before.
okay.
So
So
at 2:30 a.m. after they closed on a Sunday, we had already started demo.
that was my next question. You must have
Yeah.
been like standing around waiting for the last
No,
person to straggle out.
exactly. No, exactly. That's exactly what we did.
And
And
then you
then
just went
we'd
in
order
like a
the dumpsters. The dumpsters would show up like 3 a.m. and the dumpster would have to be gone by 8 a.m. that morning.
no
So
kidding.
we would demo the entire club and put it in the dumpsters and have the dumpsters hauled off. And
You demo the whole thing in 5 hours?
yes, yes, so we had like 20 guys on the job.
How big was the nightclub average square footage?
Some were 3,000 feet, some were 6,000 feet. It depended.
Wow, that's a lot of noise
Yeah.
at once. Okay. And then, but how would you, I mean, my buddy, Nelson, who I talk about all the time, Nelson Coates, who's the production
Yeah.
designer. I mean, he talks about how they're trying to finish sets on the fly and they're working all night because the director's coming in with the stars to do the
Yeah.
filming. And they're like, don't touch the walls because they're still wet,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're finishing like varnishing the staircase and
Yes.
stuff. When they're
Yeah.
walking in, they've worked all night.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that was like.
Pretty much. Yeah. We would do 24-hour shifts,
Oh my goodness.
and whatever had to be painted was painted in the warehouse to where it would dry overnight. And then that crew in the morning would bring those pieces in. And the way I designed it to where there was overlapping. So we would make the walls in 8-foot sections. And at the joint, there would be like a column or something that made sense with the overall design of the club. And then the last thing we would do is have the last guy come put the mirrors on the wall and hook up the bar equipment. And
How do you get inspectors in that whole process in a
we
week?
would we had set the inspections to happen. We would call the inspections. Well, in Dallas, you can call the inspections and you don't talk to anybody. It's just a recording.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a keypad kind of thing, and it's all digital. So you can call your inspection in at 6:59 a.m. and still get an inspection that day.
Wow. Okay. That's
So
just amazing. And you get so what would be the last thing? Okay. So what was the closest call you came to before they opened the nightclub at Friday at 4 o'clock or whatever?
waiting on kitchen equipment.
Really?
Yep. Ice spins and jockey box for the bar.
No kidding. And that
Yeah,
was,
we could never use those because they were always beat bad.
yeah. Yeah. That was probably, so that was the only thing that you can think of that was like the longest delay
That's
where
what
you may have
from
been nail
memory,
biting.
that's what yes. There was a lot of things that we did some hoodooing on to make it work and call it complete.
Well, what would be an average? I mean, this was back in the late 80s. I mean,
Yeah.
nightclubs were a big deal in the late 80s, but what would be the average take in a week for a nightclub?
There, 60, 70, 80,000, maybe more, 80, 100,000.
Yeah, that's a lot of money lost. They can't be sitting around waiting for somebody to figure this thing out.
No.
Yeah. I thought that was a great story. I really appreciate that. That's just
Then we used to build this huge stage outside for summer concerts.
uh-huh.
And
I don't even know why I'm already laughing because I don't even know the story.
I mean, that was something too. I mean, it was literally, it was 2 tractor trailer loads of lumber between the lumber and the plywood. The stage was 4 foot tall, and it was called Dallas Alley because it was a huge alley between buildings.
Uh-huh.
And it's at this one end of the alley is where we built the stage.
That's awesome.
They had great, I mean, 38 special. I mean, there were some serious concerts there.
Mm-hmm.
When we built the stage, they had to be able to drive a forklift on them to move the equipment around.
Mm.
So they had to be built pretty stout. I mean, it's all memory stuff. You look back on it now, and, when there's still guys that are associated with me. When we talk about the Dallas Alley stories,
That is just astounding. And is it still running as a nightclub space?
no, it closed a number of years ago, but the building is still there, and it's an historic building. Um,
Was it more like a campus, or was it one building that had different nightclubs?
no, it's it's a mixed warehouse kind of, and then there was a 5-story building that was an old warehouse that the developer went in and turned it into retail,
Mm-hmm.
specialty retail. So it had like a bunch of little boutiques, maybe 300-400 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very unique, very unique.
Well, it's so sad to see so many of your great creations kind of go away.
Yeah.
I remember working with that Michelin restaurant in Vegas, and they were on top of the palms, and it was just the most astounding design and most astounding, beautiful restaurant I had ever seen in Las Vegas. And the operators decided, no, we need a different concept, and goodbye Michelin restaurant. And they just tore out the whole top of the hotel.
Yeah.
And you just think, wow, that's just so amazing to see that go away. Well, this has certainly been a fun conversation. Well, it has been for me. And we've talked for an hour again. So
Imagine that.
My eyes are watering from laughing so hard. Okay, so everybody, thank you so much for listening. It's Diane Armitage and Bruce Russo. Thank you again. I hope we gave you some information on really what it takes to put a restaurant together and the patience that it takes and all of the factors involved. With that in mind, I'm going to let you all go, and we will see you back next week. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Bruce and Diane on this journey of mastering restaurant revenue. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps them deliver even more of what you want to hear. Until next time, keep refining your approach, stay passionate about your craft, and here's to your restaurant's continued success.